I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with DP Jeff Cutter. Jeff, I love this movie, and I always find that there's a real thoughtfulness to Dan Trachtenberg's work, the director. He's a great eye for detail for compelling characters. So I was wondering what you most value about working with him, given that you've worked with him before.
I think what I value the most working with Dan is the way that he collaborates is a very he just creates this sort of safe space for everyone to work in, where no ideas are bad ideas, and he welcomes everyone's contribution, and he always puts the movie first, and the best idea always wins. And I think that sort of allows, I think, an ability to really take chances, because you'll really swing for the fences with him, and he sort of allows you to go to those, or he wants people to try and to go to those places. And if something doesn't work, or if you go too far, he has a great sense of balance in thinking if we've gone too far, or if we're being too conservative, then he'll kind of push. I think that's he really brings the best out of everyone that he works with. And I think that's what I value the most.
Isn't it amazing when you have leadership like that, that allows you to really go maybe outside your comfort zone? Do you find, just in your past experience, that really has allowed you to create something truly amazing that perhaps maybe you weren't even really expecting when you first signed on?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the first time when we worked together, the first film we did, 10 Cloverfield Lane, I was very, while we were shooting it, I loved the script and I loved Dan's ideas when we sat down, but I really, while we were shooting it, you sort of wonder, like, does this work? Does that work? And not having worked with Dan, I was sort of very much like, okay, I don't know. Like, I didn't know. And then I remember going and seeing an early cut of his, and just thinking, wow, there's so much stuff in here that I didn't expect to work as well as it did, or just even certain sort of sequences, that the way he put them together and structured them, really sort of surprised me. And I think I've forgotten kind of what the original question was. Maybe I might have strayed a little bit.
No. But I see what you're saying, because you're allowed, that kind of space allows you to create something and maybe try things that maybe you'll fail, but at least you're given the opportunity to do it. And what really impressed me is that on the last work with Dan, it was so internal, and now it's like you just completely flipped the script and decided to do something, both of you, that was obviously by necessity so external, in the woods, in the 1700s, with a Comanche woman warrior. Like, what was your thoughts of the concept that Dan came up with obviously the creative team to set this film in the 1700s with a Comanche warrior, and just, by the way, just happens to be a Predator film as well?
Yeah, I love the mix of those two things. And I mean, I think there was a sort of, in the beginning, there was this notion of, like, if Dan loves surprises, and if there was a way for people to not know this was a Predator movie, I think he would have loved that. Obviously, marketing and those things just don't allow that. You've got, if you've got the Predator in your movie, but that was a sort of very kind of inspirational idea, where this, the landscape, that time period, and to do something entirely different from all the other Predator movies and set it in a place that none of them had been set in. And even to sort of photograph it and capture it in a way that isn't what people expect.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a sort of very exciting thing. And I think just there's something, in the same way that the script strips back to the very sort of fundamentals of, like, the Predator kind of franchise and the sort of original Predator, I felt like this was also a way to really strip back the photography in the most kind of basic way, where everything's very naturalistic, but even beyond, I mean, there's nothing beyond firelight and obviously moonlight, but there's no other sources, so daytime, it's just the sun, clouds, so forth, and then at night, you're just dealing with these two sources for light. And that was very, I think, exciting. And also, I felt like it was such a great tapestry for the film, and a great kind of just backdrop and to sort of really strip it all down. So that was when I first read it and thinking about it, that was the thing that really got me excited and inspired.
Yeah, I kept thinking after I think I saw it like a third time. I've seen it a few times. That yes, a lot of this is shot at night, and there is a lot of firelight. Like sometimes in films that are set, hundreds of years ago, it's either candlelight or firelight, a bit of moonlight, and I just always wonder, how the hell is the DP lighting this? Like, what else are you doing to augment light so that we're not just seeing half of Amber Midthunder's face? Like, what are you doing there? That must be really technical, because I have no idea how you achieve it.
There's a bunch of different there's a bunch of different approaches, I'd say, like, and different cinematographers have different ways of dealing with it. But we did a few different things. There were some sequences, several of the sequences with the torches were really primarily, and in one case, almost entirely lit by just the torches. Certainly the actors' faces were almost entirely lit by the torches. We had a couple of shots that are like these very wide shots with just like a couple of characters sort of running down this ravine. And we'd built in these small LEDs and dimmers into the torch handles just for those shots, because the shots were so wide and they're running, just wanted to have a little extra something. But a couple of the other scenes where the actors are just sort of standing holding the torches, really was the torches. We did stuff in the background to kind of like make sure that that moon presence just didn't disappear. And we probably filled in a little bit with like China balls, but very, very subtle. So that was really predominantly the torches. For the campfire scenes, it's a bit different. We're hiding small incandescent things at the base of the fire where we can, or we're taking sort of larger incandescent, all sort of tungsten. I didn't want to use any LED fixtures for the firelight, which I have done in the past. There's just something about LEDs and the color shift and those things. There's something about like an old like incandescent, like tungsten light fixture, and there's a sort of sharpness to it that you don't get with LEDs. It just felt to me, just felt really right.
Yeah.
To recreate that fire. So we sort of have that. There's an interesting thing that happens actually with firelight, where if you actually like have a campfire, like inside the teepees where we had small fires, if you just light with those fires, they actually almost flicker too much and become kind of distracting. So you sort of have to supplement, but we just tried to supplement as minimally as we can, so that you never felt like you're looking at like fake movie sources or artificial sources that which I feel like then pull you out of the movie.
That's right. I was also thinking that because this film has such a naturalistic look, and a lot of that has to do with the way you decided to light and shoot it, it then occurred to me, what was behind the decision to use thermal cameras for the Predator's body heat vision instead of just doing that in post, which probably would have just been a much easier thing to do. But you decided to know, we're going to do this. We're going to do this right and practically in camera. What was behind that?
I think like a lot of decisions on the film, I think the more you do in camera and the more that you sort of do real, I think the more even subconsciously an audience will react in a more positive way to a film, because they're not feeling like things are sort of faked. So yeah, we were like, and that was the VFX supervisor. Ryan also was a big fan of that, was like, yeah, let's do this. We wanted to kind of do what the original Predator did. We did have some of the same problems where if it was too hot, the whole ground, everything becomes red and yellow and you don't get that sort of, so sometimes we'd have to wait. I think there was definitely some VFX probably, correction that happened to the stuff that we did shoot with the thermal camera. And the other thing we actually did was we used a 3D rig and shot basically used a 3D rig to shoot two cameras simultaneously. So we had one camera shooting the thermal camera, so it was the exact same image. And then we had our motion picture camera also shooting the exact same image so that they could overlay them, so that if they needed a base of our frame, they had that. And then they had the thermal image on top of that. I'm not actually sure, to be honest, how much of it was sort of combined and how much was thermal. But I mean, I feel like, it certainly looks a lot like what I remember when we were on set.
Yeah.
So I know they, used a fair amount of it.
I just really admire the effort to really try to go for something authentic, and I just feel like it really pays off. The whole film feels so lived in. It's very immersive. A great, and also really, there's a lot of tension, and it's quite riveting and compelling. So a great example is the scene where Nara is being chased through the woods and then into the tall grass. And I've talked about this scene repeatedly because I just love it so much. I've seen it so many times. It's you deployed a really compelling combination of angles, from overhead to wide, for example. So what's the rationale as the DP, generally speaking, for that kind of coverage on a sequence that is supposed to be very fast-paced and dynamic?
Well, yeah, it's sort of fast. That sequence comes off of the big fight, so it's like she's running, and that was all. We had tracking vehicles. Some of it was technical crane that were swinging around. Some of it is we had like an electric bike, and some paths were so narrow that we had like a very lightweight, small stabilized head that we could put on the back of like an electric bicycle that then somebody was driving through the trees, because we couldn't get anything wider than like 3 feet through some of the trees. But I think it's the juxtaposition there that's really great, because she basically comes hurtling out of the trees and she's running, and we're using all those techniques to travel with her, as opposed to it feeling like static or just from the sides. You want to be with her, as you're saying, like making it more immersive and more her experience. And then she gets hauled down, and now the whole film sort of stops, and it's just you're into like suspense mode, where they're hiding and everything's quiet and the camera's very still. I think all that stuff was probably handheld. We did a lot of stuff handheld, but it's not a lot of, when we're in those sequences, it's not really aggressive handheld. It's more just to kind of keep it alive and a little bit breathing. But you get that tension building up with these now we're into like very slow pushes, and Dan loves these very sort of dramatic rack focuses where you're pushing in and you're maybe focused deep on where they're sort of sensing the predator, even though they can't quite see him.
Yeah.
And it racks like super close up to like the bowstring as he's getting pulled back. And so building tension. And then he fires and they run off, and now we're into fast paced again. So now it's like, and we had the field was actually open, and we grew that grass for that sequence. So in the very beginning of prep, we actually were hoping it would be taller, but in the beginning of prep, it was like one of the sort of the right kind of field. Nothing in Calgary actually existed there that was like kind of gave us what we wanted. So at the very, very beginning of prep, when we sort of showed up in, I guess, March probably of 21, which was a good 4 months before we started shooting, it was immediate like plant grass. We found that, plant grass. We kind of created a couple of paths, a couple of tracks in there, because we also had like the sort of the pursuit vehicle, which is like it's like a Porsche like SUV that they throw. There's now a remote crane arm that goes on top. So we had that for some of that chase stuff. We had drone, again, all of that, and we had techno crane, all to sort of just keep that really at speed and constantly moving.
Wow. And then I mean, I just love that. But then like the flip side is when Naira's sinking in the mud and she's trying to get her axe or whatever it is, a tomahawk on the branch. A lot of that tension is in Angela Catanzaro's edit, but she can't do her job unless you covered it properly. So what was the priority in that particular sequence? Was it more static, or were you trying to cover it from different angles?
Yeah, I mean, we mostly, Dan loves, we love that top down shot because it's just so graphic.
Yeah.
And actually, that sequence, I think, is one of those sequences that to me is like what Dan is really great at. Is like a very simple, it's like one of those things that's probably 2/8 of a page in the script,
Yeah.
It's like she falls in the mud, she throws her axe, she drags herself out. But that's not fun, So Dan's great at like just really stretching those sequences out and making them quite tense. So we just played a bunch of stuff basically on the axis towards, Amber, and then over the tree trunk, and just the sort of repeated, it's that sort of repetition of the axe missing and missing and missing, and she's slowly sinking. So it is that, basically it's it's not that many setups. It's sort of just those couple of directions in the top down shot. And there's not a whole lot of movement, just a couple of very specific shots.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it just comes from the repetition of like returning to those angles, and she's slowly sinking each time you come back to her.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really memorable sequences in this film, but that I keep remembering those two, and they're probably just so simple, I guess, but they're beautifully done. So, and that's why I wanted to raise them. I was also wondering, Jeff, like, it's inevitable that you were inspired by what you've seen over the years, and I'm just curious, were you inspired at all by Don McAlpine's work on the original Predator film, and perhaps other external action films, like, for example, Lubezki's work on The Revenant, things like that? Does that ever come to mind, or do you try to block all of that out?
No. I'm constantly absorbing as much as I can. So I love the original Predator, and I don't know if I necessarily pulled as much from Don's lighting as much as I think Dan and I definitely are huge McTiernan fans.
Mhm.
And so like referencing like the way his camera moves and the way he, I think obviously Predator, but Die Hard, Hunt for Red October, those are films that we've referenced multiple times. Just the way he makes these very, the way he uses the camera, the movement, but also it's the rack focuses. And I think it's also the way that he'll combine sort of multiple sort of moments that happen in a scene. And so a camera pushes in and then it tilts up and then it racks to the background and then it comes back to the foreground and now it goes over to another character. It's very, also very Spielberg-y in a way.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely referenced. I mean, it's hard not to reference The Revenant. I mean, we had a joke, which was that we were calling the movie The Prevenant when we were we called it The Revenant. It's hard not to reference, and we shot in Calgary in a bunch of the same places that they shot. So it's very difficult not, and it's so beautiful. I think like, and Dan was making this point, that fortunately, like our style is quite different, just the way that the camera moves. And, Ritu and Chivo are doing a very specific, like sort of, it's like a wider lens thing and the shots continue and continue and continue. The other big film for me, shot by an Australian cinematographer, is an Australian director too, is the 2015 Macbeth.
Yes.
Herzl directed, and then Adam Arkaposh. Adam Arkaposh is one of my favorite cinematographers.
So good.
I reference his work a lot. That film is just so like glorious and stunning, and their use of smoke was a big inspiration. Like I love using smoke, but they use so much to the point where you almost go, is this too much?
Yeah.
But then you go, it's beautiful. So
Yeah.
we kind of did that same thing, and that was a big inspiration for the what we called the burnt glade, which is when Naru and Tabe when the fur trappers are using them as bait. And we just basically wanted, it was just wanted that to be so smoky. And that was, based a lot in part on like the sort of final battle in the sort of final thing in Macbeth, where they just have so much atmosphere that it makes what would have otherwise been a very dull day exterior scene look incredible. And so we were, very much inspired by that.
Wow, I could talk about that kind of stuff with you all day. I'm such a nerd for cinematographers. So final question is this. This was shot quite a while ago now. So like, you've moved on, you've done other things. I don't even remember what I did last year, let alone 2021. But you were living and breathing this film for some time in the mud, in the woods with your crew. What most stands out for you? What was the most memorable thing about this shoot that you will take with you for the rest of your career?
I think it would probably be the sort of vastness of the locations and the beauty of the environment. And we shot quite a bit of the film on First Nations lands. So it was really untouched. And it's like, you can just see, as far as the eye can see, 360 degrees, there's nothing but the natural landscape. And I think being in that sort of environment and being in some of the places we went to where, we shot one of the sequences by the stream. We had to helicopter some of our equipment in. We shot on this amazing, like sort of bluff or overlook that we had to sort of hike up to and take, a minimal amount of equipment. But then you stand up there and it's just like, these locations that take your breath away. And I think that being lucky enough to sort of be allowed to photograph those things, you know, I mean, I've always felt and said that like 75% of good photography is like good design, meaning all the stuff you put in front of the camera.
Yeah.
Just being given the opportunity to photograph some of these locations is what I'll, you know, take away from all this, just that sort of beauty that, you know, we were afforded to shoot.
And that beauty juxtaposed with, you know, some of that really intense violence and action is for me what makes this film, just it elevates it over pretty much most other things that I saw this season. On that note, Jeff, congratulations on some beautiful work and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Rob.